Hello, this is Lisa with Unexplained Arkansas, and this week's episode is the second part of the murder of Nona Dirksmeyer. So if you haven't listened to part one, stop, go back, listen, get all that information. And I'm still congested, guys. So quick business, for the Patreon. So if you wish to join the Patreon, you can click in our show notes. There are links, so you can click the link and join the Patreon for the bonus content. So this month's bonus content, and every month there's new content, and it is voted on by the Patreons, but it's a two-parter. So there's so much information, but it's about the Zodiac killer. So if you're wanting that bonus content, you have to join the Patreon in order to get that, and then you'll kind of be a part of the community, and you'll get to choose and help vote for future content. Now, there are several other items of bonus content out there. There's the Delphi murders, the Long Island serial killer case, the assassination of Lord Mountbatten, and 6 or 7 Scary Heifer movie review episodes. So there's a lot of content on the Patreon that is not on the main channel. So you have to be a part. So go join today. You can email me if you have any questions, thoughts, anything pertaining to the unexplained or whatever you want to talk about. But unexplainedarkansas@gmail.com is the best way to reach me. And you can reach me, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. So you just reach out. So where we left off was at the end of July in 2007. So Nona's longtime boyfriend, Kevin Jones, went on trial for her murder, and he was acquitted. Nona's family was very upset by this. Obviously, they want a conviction. Her stepfather, Dwayne, ridiculed the jury out of Ozark, calling them uneducated in the media. The jurors themselves faced scrutiny, once they were back home and could talk about the case. There were several jurors that said later that, their friends and family, couldn't believe that they had acquitted Kevin. So it was, like we had talked about, it was very much that Kevin had been tried and sentenced and, kind of put to prison according to the public opinion. So Kevin's attorney, they do implore the Pope County Sheriff's Office or the Arkansas State Police to, take on the case, to continue working the case, because in their heads, obviously the Russellville Police Department, they allege that they did not investigate it. So they implore the other agencies to take on this fight. They want answers, and obviously Kevin wants answers. He wants to know who killed Nona, but he also, the only way he's ever going to not be considered guilty is if, the true killer is caught and tried and such. So the prosecution did state that they would keep Nona's case open. And like I said, this was July 2007. The defense team did ask for Todd Steffi to keep working the case when he could. And remember, he's the full-time, preacher, and he is a part-time, law enforcement, and he works cases out of Dover, primarily. So, lo and behold, a couple of months later, after Kevin is acquitted, there was a break in Nona's case. So Todd was given a file that he was working. It was a burglary file in Dover. And there was a name in the file of a suspect about this burglary, someone of interest to talk to. And this person's name is Gary Dunn. Now, Todd was familiar with Dunn. Like, he knew his name from even Nona's file. And Gary had been one of the 6 other suspects to Nona's murder that Detective Frost had allegedly ruled out. Remember, there were 6 or 7, but they had narrowed the suspect list down to 1, which, Detective Frost said was Kevin Jones. Now, Gary was familiar with Nona because he literally lived right there in the Inglewood Apartments, at the time of her death. And furthermore, he was familiar to law enforcement because he was an ex-convict. He had been convicted of assaulting a woman jogging in Russellville in 2002. And he had been sentenced, and then at the time of Nona's death, he was actually out on parole from this assault. So, according to the police file, Gary's alibi was that he had been shopping at the time of the murder. He alleged he had receipts, he had given receipts and showed that he was not responsible, couldn't be responsible for Nona's death. Now, Todd Steffi tracked down these receipts, and lo and behold, the receipts that had been collected were from a completely different day than December 15th, which was the day that Nona was killed. Now, Todd's interest obviously is beyond piqued. He wanted DNA on Gary because remember, they had DNA on that condom wrapper. So he was like, okay, you got this ex-convict. His alibi actually wasn't solid, and my goodness. So the night before he was set to meet up with Gary to interview him regarding the burglary case, Todd went to Kevin's defense attorneys and asked if he got DNA on Gary, would they be willing to have the DNA compared to the condom wrapper? They vehemently said yes, like they'll find a way to get that done. So Todd meets with Gary, and he just asked for Gary's DNA. Nothing crazy. Gary gives him the DNA, thinking this was related to this burglary. That's what he was talking to him for. So no big deal. He gets the DNA. In September 2007, one of Kevin's attorneys, Mike Robbins, sends Gary's DNA sample off to see if it's a match. They send it back to that lab in Florida that had worked on it before. And at first, this was kind of a huge issue. So who's going to pay for it? So the Jones, they had spent their family's life savings on Kevin's, trial. They were just beyond tapped out. So, the attorneys still were like, okay, here's the deal. Janice, this is, Kevin's mom. The cost of this test is about $600. And Janice does decide, okay, we will spend this money. This is worth it. And she even said, it's only money. Like, what am I going to do? This could help Kevin, it could help Nona, it could help, they were willing to spend it. So the Jones pay for this test. So the test is sent out, and a few weeks later, Mike Robbins calls Todd with the DNA results. The results concluded that Gary's DNA was a partial match to the DNA on the condom wrapper. Like, he couldn't be excluded. Like before, Kevin was excluded. So Gary is in the match group. So there you go. So Kevin's defense team, obviously, and Kevin's family and, everyone, I don't know who all they were able to tell at the moment, obviously they're elated. This is a turnaround moment. So now, with this information, Todd Steffi took the findings to prosecutor David Gibbons, who then went to see the state's special prosecutor, Jack McQuarrie. So David had kind of had to recuse himself because obviously he had just prosecuted Kevin Jones. And then also David was the prosecutor who had sent Gary to prison for the assault in 2002. So he had already tried and convicted him. And then he had just prosecuted Kevin Jones for Nona's, death. So this all, he needed a special prosecutor. So Jack McQuarrie takes over. So now, with the special prosecutor on board, the case really needed an investigation office. And obviously the Russellville Police Department weren't going to do it. No way. They had already decided, that Kevin Jones was the culprit. So now you have the Arkansas State Police take over the file. So the police assigned the case to Stacy Rhodes. Stacy, at this time in 2007, had been with the state police since 1998. So she was a seasoned officer. And then Todd Steffi was asked to assist Stacy in her investigation. So what they had to do, obviously, is start at the very beginning and review what all the Russellville Police Department did and didn't do, which, of course, Todd was already privileged to all that they hadn't done because he's the one that had, followed in their footsteps, with the defense for Kevin. So they knew that the crime scene had been contaminated. The lampshade had been removed. They knew people weren't wearing gloves when they were in and out of the apartment that night, as in police people. The cell phone on the floor, like Nona's cell phone, was moved to the table. So it was, it wasn't photographed kind of where it had been. So it was moved. It had been touched. There had been prints found on the base of the lamp. So we're talking the base, but they didn't match Kevin. So only match to Kevin, remember, was the tacky, like palm print in blood on the bulb of the lamp. But the actual base of the lamp, which according to Dr. Noakes, the medical examiner, was the actual murder weapon. And the Russellville Police Department never checked, behind people. They didn't check, they didn't get all the prints. They didn't cross-check people at the scene for for their prints to, rule them out. Blood was not collected in several areas of the apartment because there was a lot of blood left behind. So there was a lot of potential DNA, evidence, but that was not collected. They did also, obviously, Rhodes and Steffi did dive into Gary because obviously he's their main suspect they're looking at. His DNA can't be excluded. He's right there, an ex-convict. So on the day that Nona was killed, which was the 15th of December of 2005, so some officers, afterwards did go by Gary's apartment because they were asking all the neighbors if they had seen anything. Of course, they have to do that. That's what you do. So Gary tells the officers he had been working actually at his mom's house that day. He was sanding and painting a room in her house, and her name is Martha, and she lived actually in Dover, which we had talked about before. So Dover, Arkansas is, 14 miles away from Russellville, away from where Gary was living in the apartment, away from where Nona was killed. So he says he was with his mother, that they at lunchtime had made a run to Lowe's to get more paint supplies. He then ran by his apartment to check on his cats, and he was with his mother, allegedly. And again, Martha could back all this up. He assured the officers that his mother, Martha, could vouch for his whereabouts that day and that he could produce receipts. So that's how he left that conversation. Now, so on the 20th, 5 days, after the 15th, Gary's parole officer phones the Russellville Police Department, and he tells them an ex-convict named Gary Dunn, who had a history of violence against women, lived in the same complex as Nona, which, according to Frost, was a surprise to Frost. Like, he said that he was surprised to hear that. Frost said when he found out, he didn't know Gary was on parole. So he knew about Gary. He knew about his prison sentence, and he was thinking that Gary was still in prison. So remember, Frost was new to homicide, but not new to law enforcement. So Frost had actually worked the case against Gary when he had attacked the jogger in 2002. So Frost was very familiar with Gary Dunn. He had worked that case. And Frost wasn't the officer who had interviewed Gary on the night of the 15th. It was other officers, so he wasn't privileged to that information or whatnot. But in fact, here's the deal. So Frost knew that Gary had gone to prison in 2002. He had been given a 6-year sentence, but Gary had been paroled in 2004 after only 18 months. So he served 18 months of a 6-year sentence. I'm sorry, there's something wrong with that. Anywho, I don't understand that whole deal, and we see this repeatedly throughout cases that we've talked about. But yikes, like 18 months of a 6-year sentence. So Gary and his wife had actually, and their children had actually been living in the Inglewood Apartments, same as Nona, for about 8 months. So that's how long he had been out on parole. So he's still on parole. So, Frost is made aware of this information on the 20th. Just keep that in mind too. So the circumstances surrounding that prior assault were, so Gary was sitting on a bench at a place called the Bonadilla Trails Park and Sanctuary. It's like a large just park where people go to, I don't know, it's got like tons of trees and walking trails, and it's just a very pretty place to hike and take your dogs and whatnot, and people jog there. So Gary is there, and he is sitting on this bench, and a young woman named Kelly runs past him. Now, according to Kelly, Dunn then proceeds to follow her. He chases her down. He hits her in the head with a tree branch, and then repeatedly, and then proceeds to choke her. So he is assaulting her. He's assaulting her with a tree branch. He's choking her. All the while, he is telling her he is going to kill her. Now, luckily, she is able to fight him, and she is able to get away, and she is able to run. So she runs to her car and luckily gets away from this man, okay? So, again, so this is what happened. So Frost was told about Gary literally living right across from Nona. He is told on the 20th. He doesn't even follow up with any of this information or with Gary until the 22nd. Now remember, on the 22nd, the Russellville prosecutor and Detective Frost and Chief Bacon held a press conference at 9 a.m. And this is the same day as Nona's funeral. So at 9 a.m., they tell, Russellville, they tell the community that they have one suspect. So and honestly, like the night before, they had already told Nona's family that, Kevin Jones was, the killer. So again, he finds this information out about an ex-convict living in the same apartment on the 20th. Like, it was so obviously concerning to Gary Dunn's parole officer that he called them with this information. Like, he's like, yeah, an ex-convict lives there. I don't know about you, but red flags. But here's the deal. The Russellville Police Department, they had already made up their mind. They had their suspect. They were going after Kevin. And that's what they did. So they do, even though they have Kevin, so they do call Gary Dunn. He comes in, and he is interviewed by the department's polygrapher. Remember Bill Glover. So the polygrapher that had 28 years experience, but 0 certifications for performing polygraphs. Yes. So Bill has Gary come in, and the whole thing, of course, is recorded. They can play back later. The whole thing is extremely laid back, very calm. He does read Gary's his rights, and then he does ask Gary questions, specifically about medical, when was the last time Gary had been checked out medically, which Gary did respond. It had been a while. Like, he says, oh, it's been a while. Now, Gary does relay to Bill that he has a type of medical condition called Reiter complex, and it's a heart and circulation condition. So Bill also does note and ask about a cut on Gary's hand. So there is a big enough cut. And this is, how many days later? About 17 days after, Nona was killed. So there is a prominent cut on Gary's hand. But Bill asked about it, noticed it, but doesn't photograph it, doesn't try to look for any additional cuts on Gary as far as, the rest of him that he can't see. Okay? So Bill tells Gary, exactly what questions he's going to ask him in the polygraph. And again, I've told you how I feel about polygraphs, but, it is what it is. So Bill says to Gary after the test, what if I tell you you failed and that it looks like you killed her? And Gary just sits there. He's seasoned, guys. He's been in this chair before. He is very, very different from Kevin Jones. So Gary just shrugs and yawns, literally just shrugs and yawns, didn't react at all, just kind of sits there. And then Bill just says, like, after he says, what if I tell you you failed? I mean, it's just such a mind game, I guess. But he then goes, oh, well, it appears this looks fine. And Gary is allowed to leave. He is, free to go. Bye. You allegedly passed it according to what we're telling you. And remember, they have their suspect. They have Kevin. They're done. So, yeah. So that's what happens on the 22nd. So now, State Police Investigator Rhodes and Todd Steffi, they're going all over Dunn's alibi. They're going all over everything from 2005. They, notice he did turn in receipts. Those receipts don't match up. They don't match up with what he had told, the investigators, what he purchased. They don't match up with the time of day even. And then they don't match up the date. So the receipts that were turned in were from December 13th, not December 15th. So across the board, these receipts did not match at all. And Rhodes and Steffi do try to see if the police had followed up to try to get, video footage from Lowe's. And come to find out, they did go to Lowe's. So the Russellville Police Department, even though they had already, I believe by the time they got to Lowe's, they had already even arrested or would have been close to arresting Kevin, which was in March of, 2006, the next year. So they do go to Lowe's. However, Lowe's, they don't keep their recordings forever. And after 90 days, everything's recorded over. So there was no recording to get. They obviously didn't care to have that recording. They didn't go there right away. They didn't look into Dunn right away. I mean, they just did not do it. And and obviously there was tons that they didn't do. So that was not a huge surprise to anybody. So Rhodes and Steffi continue to work on the case, on Gary Dunn. And in August of 2008, a full year after Kevin's acquittal, Gary Dunn is arrested for Nona's murder. This news sent a shockwave through Russellville. People were absolutely shocked. They're like, what? So, they're still under the fact that Kevin did it and that he got away with it. That's all that they know. So now the town is very, very mixed again. What is going on? This is shocking news. So Special Prosecutor Jack McQuarrie was going after Gary, and he was going after Gary for capital murder. This is the death sentence. So because of this decision to go after the death sentence, there was some information that Jack could not, put in the trial. It was Gary's past conviction of assaulting Kelly in 2002. So Jack explained, because of the appeals process and just the scrutiny behind death cases, that he couldn't bring in Gary's prior crime. It just wouldn't work. Additionally, just like with Kevin, Gary's defense, attorneys asked for a change of venue, and the judge does move the trial, from Russellville, from Pope County, down to Clarksville, Arkansas, which is 27 miles to the west of Russellville in Johnson County. So remember, the other Kevin was tried in Ozark in a different county. And so now, Gary's going to be tried in Johnson County. So the trial was first on the schedule for September 2009, but then the judge did push. And so the actual trial did not start until April 2010. I mean, this is 4.5 years after Nona's death. This is almost a full 5 years. So what the prosecution had, it was a lot of circumstantial evidence. They did have the DNA on the condom wrapper. The DNA is never 100% match. They kind of give you those statistics. So an expert, obviously they're not going to say this is 100%. And it was also like a partial match. So this is like a partial match, but the DNA literally said that, it was a 1 in 166 million males, which would be the amount of men in the U.S., okay? So they're saying 1 in the population of the United States is that it's Gary, okay? So the match, I mean, when you say it in those terms, for me, yeah, that would be a match to me. Like I'm thinking, okay. But, and according to the prosecution expert, McCarty, so yes, so the prosecution, they would allege also that, Dunn was lying about his alibi. They would get into the whole, the receipts. Obviously, he didn't really have an alibi. They poked holes at, Martha, Gary's mother, is saying that he was, with her, but, it was very clear that he wasn't. So basically, there was no set alibi for Gary on the day of Nona's death, and the prosecution would hone in on that. The prosecution would also put Jennifer Dunn on the stand. Now, Jennifer was Gary's estranged wife, and she and their kids lived in the apartment complex with Gary when Nona was killed. And Jennifer would testify that the day of Nona's murder, Gary was acting strangely. He picked her up from work. She worked at Walmart. He picked her up, and his hair was wet, and she could smell soap. Like she knew that he had showered. He had washed his hair, and evidently this was unusual for Gary, especially, I guess, by that, normally when he picked her up from work, I guess this was normal for her to be picked up, but he was not clean. He was not showered. He didn't smell like soap. So she immediately was like, this is odd. And Gary had also told Jennifer that he had been home cleaning their apartment, which was also odd. Like, he didn't clean the apartment. So those two things were like, he didn't do that. And he was just acting very strangely. She did note how quiet Gary was whenever they, pulled up to their apartment complex. They had the kids, they had gotten them food, they had pulled up to the Inglewood Apartments, and there were like emergency service people everywhere. And Gary didn't have a lot to say, it's like, what, the normal response is what is going on here? What has happened? He was eerily quiet, she notated. And everybody was there when they pulled up. The police, the coroner's van, like all of it was obvious something had happened. Jennifer also stated that Gary had asked her to lie to the police about his alibi that day. So that was, obviously another reason why the prosecution put her on the stand, as normally spouses don't go on the stand. So Jennifer did have a lot of other things to say about Gary. She stated that Gary was abusive to her. He would force her to have rough sex or even rape her. She also, like, one night had gotten up and Gary wasn't in bed. He wasn't in the apartment. She was looking around, and then, she kind of walked out their front door and she noticed that he was at Nona's apartment. And at first she said that she was furious with Nona, had been like, well, why do you have this married man at your house? It's 2 a.m. You shouldn't have him. And then later on, it kind of hit her that Gary wasn't invited to Nona's. Like, she felt like Nona was, it was forced. Like, he had gone over there. And, just basically, I guess she had thought about the transaction, and Nona's face about the whole thing was like, Nona did not want him there. He had gone there uninvited, definitely uninvited. Prosecutor McQuarrie felt like Jennifer was a good witness. She did a good job. He felt she was earnest and believable, but he would note later that Jennifer had lived hard. Her circumstances, of being married to, Gary, an ex-convict, now a person involved in a murder case. She was raising children on her own, as a single woman, pretty much. And she was weathered. She was spent. She evidently, at the time of the trial, was working as a stripper in Oklahoma just to put food on the table for the kids. And McCarty knew that jurors might have an issue with Jennifer. and he didn't realize how much, and they would. So now the defense attorney, their names were Jeff Rosenwig and Bill James. So their argument, and they are court appointed, by the way. They are attorneys out of Little Rock, but they are court appointed. Gary did not have the means to get his own attorney like Kevin's family did for him. So they claim that Gary couldn't have killed Nona because Kevin killed her. So their, response, their defense is basically to put Kevin back in, try to convict Kevin, because then that means that Gary can't be convicted. So this is another trial for Kevin, so to speak, as far as the defense's route, which the defense attorneys are doing what defense attorneys are supposed to do. They're supposed to try to defend their client. So, and they stated that, Kevin didn't really have an alibi, that his grandmother and his mother and his friend Ryan and everybody that saw him that day, they were lying. They were all liars. So, again, the defense is just pointing at Kevin. That's all that they're doing. As far as the receipts go that Gary compiled for the police and gave to the police, the defense was like, he was just complying with what he was told to do. Like, he was just, he was asked for receipts and he gave receipts. Like, they never even really were like notated about the fact that they were the wrong dates. They were just receipts in general. They weren't actual receipts that collaborated with any type of alibi. Now, the defense also, as good defense should do, called their own DNA expert. And this is 2009, or 2010 by this time. DNA is not new, but this was, new enough to definitely poke some holes in. This is a partial, match, like it was a partial match. So the defense experts, they go into all kinds of percentages and probabilities. They talk to the jury about different ethnic groups. And so basically they're punching holes as much as they can into the DNA. And they do an elaborate job of such, and a good job of that. But, there's only so much DNA talk a jury can stand before I think it all runs together. So I think the job of this expert was to confuse the issue and to poke holes at the DNA that the state expert had. So, and it, and it would work. So they just say that Gary couldn't be excluded, but that didn't mean it was Gary, blah, blah. So after 2 weeks of testimony, the jury was sent to deliberate. One juror named Corey, who would, be talked to afterwards. So he was a firefighter in Russellville. Like, he had trouble with the whole thing because he knew something that was not mentioned in the trial. He knew about Gary's prior conviction on the assault in 2002. So he knew something, and it was bothering him. Like, he's like, I can't let this information go. This information is extremely important. And so what Corey did was he sends a note to the judge asking about this information. Like, is this information, or can this information come into play? Is it something that he could mention to the other jurors? What is legal? Like, he wanted to know legally what was available to do about this information, because he felt is extremely pertinent to make a decision about this. So the judge finds out who wrote the note. He finds out Corey wrote the note, and then Corey is dismissed as a juror. So, yes. So now the jurors, they're deliberating. This is Friday the 20th. And then they kind of do some polls, and then they come up with, guilty. Like, some were guilty and some were not. Like, they just can't, they're polling and it's just not working. So they all felt like they needed more evidence, and they had a lot of strong opinions. So Friday, they don't make a decision. And then they come in for another 2.5 hours on Saturday, and they have to tell the judge they can't come to a decision. They were deadlocked, like they weren't agreeing. So Judge Pearson, it has to declare a mistrial. And afterwards, now that the trial is actually over, the prosecutors can talk to the jury. They can get like the rundown, because of course they can't, anyway. It's allowed at this point. So they do talk to the jury. They kind of get the feelings of like, what were you feeling? Like what was going on? So the jury, lets them know that Jennifer was definitely not believable as a witness. They felt like she was not believable. They felt like the defense poked enough holes in the DNA so that the DNA evidence, which was really the only physical evidence against Gary, was, not viable. And then they even the jury felt like, Dunn was responsible, but they didn't have enough evidence. And they did say, now that the trial's passed, they're able to find out about Dunn's prior conviction. And so they're asked, okay, knowing what you know now, would that have made a difference? And yes, it would have made a difference. They concede that would definitely have made a difference in making a decision about his guilt, because before they felt like it was him and they didn't have enough evidence, but they didn't know about his prior conviction, his prior history with women. So May 2nd, 2010, poor Nona's family has gone through, this is the second trial and still no conviction. And, you're just feeling, I'm sure they're feeling deflated. Like, oh my. Well, immediately, Jack McCarty, now he's got more information. He's kind of, he's not worried. Like he's good. Like he's good to go to immediately start working on a second trial. Like he's going to go after him, but now he knows what he has to do. Like he has to leave behind the death penalty and have Kelly, the assaulted jogger, be a witness. Like he's got to get that information to the jury because, he's been told, hey, this makes a difference. And it certainly obviously made a difference in that juror Corey's mind that was dismissed. And then the other jurors having found out, hindsight. So on January 13th, now 2011, Gary Dunn sits for his second murder trial. And it's the same evidence. It is the same attorneys. It's the same town. It's still in Clarksville. The same judge. Like everything's the same. But this time, no death penalty. Like they're not going after the death penalty. And the jury would hear about Gary's prior conviction in 2002. Also a difference. So this time, Carol, Nona's mom, she would actually sit with the Jones family. So she would be in conjunction, seen with them. And she had, according to interviews later on, there was, her and Kevin did come together. They did, kind of say, their apologies to each other or whatever. They reconciled. Carol, I guess, sitting through, Gary Dunn's first trial, conceded that she didn't feel like Kevin did it. Like she felt like Gary did it. So kind of all of that is, all of their past is put aside. And so now Carol and the Jones, are sitting together at this trial. The prosecution really wanted for this jury to see that, like, obviously Nona's own family, is sitting with Kevin Jones. So, and Kevin Jones' family, of course, is there because Kevin has to take the stand. He took the stand in Gary's first trial, and now he's going to have to take the stand. And basically, he's been on trial. The defense went after him in the first trial, and they're still doing the same thing. The defense is still on the same route of putting Kevin Jones on trial because that's their best leg to stand on. So, just like before, Gary couldn't have done it because Kevin did it. So 2 weeks of the trial again, this time, the jury did hear from, Kelly. Kelly did take the stand. That was the only difference. So this time, the jury gets together. It's 8 women and 4 men, and they deliberate for 12 hours after a 2-week trial, and they, again, cannot come to a solution. They, too, are deadlocked. Like, they just can't get it together. 8 of them said not guilty. 4 of them were guilty, very guilty. They could not agree. They just couldn't agree. No, they weren't going to change their mind. So this jury states that, the defense just did a really good job of prosecuting Kevin, and that the burden, that was a huge burden right away on the jury. And they felt the DNA, again, was inconclusive. They felt like the defense muddied the water on that. The jurors also, again, agreed Jennifer Dunn, not reliable. And then, regarding, Kelly the jogger's testimony. So they felt like there wasn't enough information given to them surrounding what happened to Kelly in 2002. And literally one of the jurists, which was a woman, she stated that in her head, if Gary was a killer, then he would have killed that jogger in 2002. So to her, that whole thing was irrelevant. And really, so basically what she's saying, and the way I'm taking it, is because that woman lived, that meant that there was no way Gary could have killed Nona. So, for me, I'm sorry, phone me in, let me know what you think. But, I don't think people start out just flat out killing people. They're escalation. So, I think it's proven over and over that, a man, especially when it comes to assault and going after women, sometimes they start off with just even being a peeping Tom or a stalker, before they escalate to murder. But the fact that you can say, okay, he chased this woman down, he beat her with a tree branch, he choked her, he said he was going to kill her, he wanted to kill her, but that wasn't enough. The fact that she lived spoke volumes in the fact that he couldn't commit a murder a few years later. Really? Really? That statement really bothers me. I'm like, that is really mind-boggling. And of course, I don't know how the prosecution approached, the assault in 2002, or what was said. Obviously not enough was said and not enough was hammered in on this, because this is, that was a pattern. And of course, they're only seeing one instance, so just one prior assault, but he was given a prison sentence. Now, he didn't have to serve very long of it, but come on. That blows my mind a little bit, that first, trial for Gary Dunn, the jury was like, yeah, definitely hearing about his prior conviction of assaulting a woman would definitely make up, or help make up my mind. And then this jury's like, nah, he didn't kill her. I don't know. That's just hard. I've never been a jurist. I know that's a very hard thing for them, but wow. And again, I guess the prosecution, could have done a better job on outlining that. Obviously the defense, and these, again, are, a public defenders, did a great job. They did a great job. Their client got off. So, Kevin had to spend $500,000 to get an acquittal. And Gary Dunn gets, free attorneys bought by the state, and he gets 2 mistrials. It's just interesting. It's just absolutely interesting. So, yeah. So the jury said that they felt like, so the second jury, just like the first, they do feel like Gary had something to do with it. But again, not enough overall evidence for them to say guilty. So 8 not guilty, 4 guilty. And the jurors did concede that the police did a totally, the initial investigation was bad. It was not, a lot of that evidence that could have been procured at the time. Obviously, you can't go back in time. The state police and Steffi couldn't go back in time to get all that evidence that was lost the first time around. So it is what it is. So it was gone. And, and sadly, this, poor Nona's family. So obviously, this second mistrial is total devastation for Carol and Nona's family. I mean, there's still no justice. Third trial, people, third trial, no justice. So Jack McCarty, he is still not phased. He is fully intending to go after Gary again. I mean, I'm sure in his head, he knows, like, he's had 2 jurors. He knows what they're thinking. I guess he's feeling like he can put together, a more solid case the third time, or maybe he's just trying to wear down, or maybe he's hoping that, the defense backs away, to go do something else, whatever. So Carol does go, and this is all from McCarty later on, but Carol goes to McCarty and says, thank you for your work, but I know who did it now. And these trials are just wearing me out. Like, I can't sit through another one. Like, I just can't do it. I mean, this poor woman has sat through 3 trials. Like, she has been through it. She's been, told that Kevin's a psychopath, and then Kevin's put on trial, and now you've got an ex-convict that was living right across the way from her daughter. I mean, had she even known that in real life? Like, but beyond, let's just say if Nona nothing had happened to Nona, but just knowing that information, yeah, like, she wouldn't have wanted Nona to live across from an ex-convict that had assaulted a woman in 2002, tried to kill her. No, it's just utter heartbreaking. Like, that is so upsetting as a woman and as a mother. Like, it's just heartbreaking. So, yeah, it is what it is. So, Gary Dunn has now been locked up. I mean, he's been locked up for probably the longest he's been locked up. Let's be honest, because, he gets out after 18 months, it seems like, of 6-year sentences. But he's been locked up from August 2008. And now, McCarty does go to the judge and says that he is not going to pursue at this time a third trial. So Gary Dunn is released in April of 2011. So, and Gary's attorneys, obviously, they're elated. They're absolutely elated. They're like, yay, we knew he was innocent. No, they were like, he is absolutely, like, innocent. He didn't do this. We are never going to see Gary Dunn facing any issues with the justice system. And he is definitely not a threat to the public. Unfortunately, for all women, they were wrong. Imagine that. So there's been a lot of wrong people in this whole ordeal. It's like, sometimes you maybe shouldn't talk so much. So, I don't know. Food for thought. So, I've been there too. Sometimes we just all need to shut our mouths. So, it's been 6 years since all this began. And over that time, obviously, Kevin, he's grown older, he's grown up. He's been in and out of the courtroom, with his own trial and then being involved in Gary Dunn's trials. But during all this, he gets older, he gets married, he finishes his bachelor's, and by 2012, he is pursuing a law degree. So he is in law school. He wants to be an attorney. I'm sure, and I have heard a lot of people that go through their own legal struggles. They do. They do want to find out more. They do want to help others, and they just really want to advocate or make sure that what they went through doesn't happen to other people. So he's in law school, 2012. So additionally, there were a lot of missteps. Obviously, Kevin felt, very violated by the Russellville Police Department. It had cost his family $500,000, to, defend him and to keep him from going to prison for what he, they felt like he did not have anything to do with. And he did feel like, he wanted not only retribution for the cost of his, legal stuff, but exoneration of his name. So in December, so in April, Dunn is let out. By December of 2011, Kevin files a lawsuit and has his attorneys, Robin and Robbins, file a lawsuit against Detective Mark Frost, Chief Bacon, and Gary Dunn himself. And in the lawsuit, they state that Frost knew all along that Dunn's alibi evidence, was false, and that he had made notes about it. Like, people, Todd Steffi had found the notes, and there were notes, his notes were found. He had lied to prosecution back then and said all the other suspects, had checked out, and they hadn't, So he had told the prosecution, oh, that's great. He had also told the prosecution that not only did they have, that bloody tacky palm print on the bulb, because that was a deal, for them. That was their only evidence. Well, he had told the prosecutor that they had other print evidence of Kevin. He had told them that Kevin's prints were on the base of the lamp. And that was not true. That was never true. So he did have to be, like, in this lawsuit, of course, everyone is, deposed. They have to do depositions, so you can ask just all kinds of questions. And during this time, Detective Frost, although he's trying to, you can see videos of such, you can watch videos, look for those, but, he did have to admit he didn't give the prosecution the information about Dunn, about the alibi, the so-called alibis, about any of it. He also stated that the probable cause stating that Jones' prints were on the base of the lamp was done in error. He admits it was untrue. So, yeah, so this lawsuit is filed for $10 million. Kevin said, yeah, the money would be very nice for his family, to make his family whole again. This whole ordeal took a huge toll on the Jones family. And not just financially, but, yeah, I mean, and everybody knows that, it was devastating for his family and rocked his family's world in a lot of different ways, like never made them the same. So, and Kevin's biggest thing, of course, he really wanted to see justice. He wanted to see justice for Nona. He wanted to see justice for himself. And he wanted Gary to be declared culpable. We're talking, this is after 2, mistrials. Kevin, just like Carol, believed Gary did it. It was obvious to them that he was responsible, and he wanted him to be held responsible. So, yeah, he really wanted for, additionally, Detective Frost and Chief Police Bacon to not be able to be in a position to do what he had done to Kevin, what they had done to Kevin, to anybody else. Like, as far as, not showing the prosecutor all the evidence, So that's what happened. Ultimately, the lawsuit would go nowhere. The judge did deny the filing because the statute of limitations of filing had passed by 3 months. They were too late. So had they filed back in August of 2011, they could, they would have been in the statutes. So over the next few years, Dunn would continue living in Pope County. And he would be, this is remarkable because, of course, his attorney said that there was no way he'd ever cross, any more paths with law, people. He would be in various situations. He did have a firearms convictions, and it did send him back to prison for quite a bit. He is a convicted felon, and now he was caught with firearms that he shouldn't have. So, now he goes to prison, but in 2018, he is released. So he is released from prison, and he would continue doing what Gary Dunn does best: act inappropriately towards women, and targets women, and assaults women. On Tuesday, December 4th, 2018, a young woman named Amber was working her shift at the Walmart in Darnell. And again, Darnell is very close to Russellville. Darnell was where Kevin and his mom were headed when they were going to that Christmas party the night Nona died. So Amber, she goes outside to take a smoke break, and she's kind of sitting on the curb right there where the employees break. I don't know. I've always seen Walmart employee break areas. They kind of have like a picnic table, but people sit on the curb, whatever. So she was just sitting on the curb in this employee break area. It's typically facing like kind of on the side of the building or whatever. I mean, it's still like it's a Walmart. It's a big parking lot. People can pull up to that area. Well, but typically no one does, according to Amber that night. But that night, Amber says she sees a car driving towards her, aiming its lights directly at her. And of course, she's startled. She's just sitting there trying to take her break, sitting there at the curb. So the car stops, still shining its lights, about 10 feet from her and just sits. And she's just like, okay, like this is odd. She's just trying to brake. So after a couple minutes or so, the driver gets out and begins to approach her. And she notes the man is tall, and she's sitting down, but sharp nose, red hair, and he appears to be holding something at his waist. And initially she's like, she's freaking out because she's like, is this a gun? Like she cannot see exactly like what's going on. And she's in shock. She's just sitting there. She's in shock. And as she gets closer, she realizes it's his penis. And then she recognizes him to be the man that was arrested for killing Nona. So Amber knew about Nona's case because her mother actually was a congregant in Todd Steffi's church. So she knew all about this case. Her mother had told her all about this case. And I will say, moms do that. I do that to Elle. Like, you want to tell your daughter things that have happened as like a precautionary tale. Like, this happened. Be aware. So Amber was fully aware of, Gary Dunn. So she was like, this is Gary Dunn. So Amber is now, a man is coming at her with his penis out right in front of her, right towards her. She is by herself. She is in fight or flight mode. She stands up from sitting on the curb and she starts screaming at Gary to leave her alone, leave, run, just screaming. So Gary, I guess it startles him, breaks him out of his little whatever was going on in his pathetic little mind. So he starts to like apologize to her. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were someone else. Like, really? Like that whole bit? Thought you were someone else? Ugh. Anyway, she's still screaming at him. And luckily, like, he turns around, he's still apologizing and gets in his car and drives away. And Amber is shook. I say this all the time. I can't even imagine how that went. She's just shaky. She immediately calls her mom and tells her mom what has happened and tells her mom that she thinks it's this Gary Dunn. But her mom's like, I don't know if it is because he should still be in prison. So Gary had been given a 10-year sentence for that firearm. So put that in perspective. He gets 6 years for assaulting, Kelly, 10 years for the firearm, but he is out. He is out on parole, of course, again, didn't stick too long. So he is on parole. They don't know that, but yeah. So it's crazy. So Amber's mom is telling her, no, I think he's still he should still be in prison. Well, Amber's so confused. She gets off the phone with her mom. She calls her dad, and her dad is like, wait a minute, I just saw a Facebook post from another young girl in the area, like in the Russellville area, and a man had approached her, a man had followed her, and he was driving a silver Kia. He's like, Amber, what was this man driving? And Amber said, a silver Kia. It's matching up. So she immediately, like, her dad's like, call 911. So she calls 911. They send the police, and luckily, and tells them, silver Kia. So luckily, dumb Gary, is still in the parking lot. So he's still, like, after he left Amber, he doesn't leave the Walmart. He doesn't leave. He is still in the parking lot, and luckily he's somewhat not smart. So the police are able to get him, and Amber is able to watch him be arrested. And Amber will tell in interviews how very glad she was that she phoned 911, that she could get him arrested. So earlier that day, what Amber's dad had been talking about, was a 22-year-old young woman named Riley Wagner, who actually, and this is, this is interesting, just like Nona, she was in the beauty pageant circle. So, in fact, Riley had been very familiar with Nona's case. Like, she was from the area. She knew of Nona's case. But Riley, and just a little side note, Riley would go on to win the Miss Arkansas pageant. And I believe in 22. And she was going to go on to compete in the Miss USA pageant. So, yeah, good for Riley. So, this is December 4th, 2018. Riley notices a car following absurdly close to her. Like, she's just driving, like she had finals. Gosh, and this is so parallel to Nona, isn't it, guys? I mean, just so parallel. It's sickeningly paralleled. She is driving back to her dorm, and she goes to Arkansas Tech University just like Nona did. And so this car is following her, and she pulls into, a parking spot, and the car pulls up right behind her. It's, the lights are on her and she can't see anything. And she's like, this person has blocked me. And she is alarmed. She is completely alarmed. And this person, the driver, gets out of the car and comes to her driver's side door and starts beating. I mean, he's trying to get into her car. He's trying to get her. Like, he's trying to abduct her. And so luckily she has locked the door and she is calling 911, and he can tell that she's calling 911. And so when that happens, he, does leave. He gets in his car and drives away, and she was able to say, okay, he's in a silver Kia and he had a temporary license tag. Like, it was obviously like a new car or something to him. So now Mr. Innocent Gary, or at least to his, defense attorneys, who would never be in trouble again. So he is arrested. So luckily, Gary ends up pleading guilty to attempted kidnapping and indecent exposure. So he is sentenced. So they give him this is weird to me. He's sentenced for 15 years for the attempted kidnapping. However, it said something about 10 years is just time spent or something. So basically, the kidnapping part is reduced to just 5 years. So he's given 5 years in prison, and then it was supposed to be 1 year, but I think they run consecutively or, at the same time. So 1 year for the indecent exposure item. So basically, it's 5 years in prison. Okay. So in 2023, he was up for parole, but luckily was denied. He was kept. Now, however, he is up for parole in 2025. I don't know what month. I couldn't find out any information on that. I don't know about you guys, but as a woman, as a mother, this is just excruciating. This man is dangerous. This man is a problem, and he will be possibly out of prison this year. And I'm sure he's probably going to go hang out in Pope County again. So just say that. Just put that on our minds. I don't know how we can urge the state of Arkansas to not parole this man, but this is scary. So yeah. So just keep that in mind, ladies. Keep that in mind. I urge you to be vigilant and aware of things, just like Amber and Riley and Kelly, poor Kelly from 2002, because, poor Nona, didn't know that this ex-convict was living right across the way. So just be vigilant, guys. So I do kind of, I guess if this is a question too, I mean, if you were on that second jury, if you were one of those jurists, knowing what is known now, how do you feel about that? What do you think about that? I mean, obviously you can't go back in time. Obviously you did what you did at that time because of what was presented. But wow, I mean, in hindsight is always 2020. It always is. But it's how do you feel? And to really know that first jury, they were like, oh yeah, had I known about his prior, made a huge difference. But the second jury knew. The second jury knew about what he had done in 2002. But it wasn't enough. Is it enough now? Like, how much more is Gary Dunn going to be allowed to do? That's the question. So much has happened. I mean, so much has happened since, Nona left us in 2005. Kevin is grown. He is an attorney. He has a family. It looks like his grandma passed away in 2020, but his parents are still living, from what I can tell, and that's a blessing. So I know that, I'm sure Kevin and his family just want to put all of this behind them. Just, live and let live. And of course, I'm sure that they're equally feeling what I'm feeling about Gary Dunn. So, and we know where Gary Dunn is presently. He's in a prison cell, but how much longer is that going to last? Like, I'm concerned. So, very concerned. Now, Detective Frost, who himself stated, he had been slammed hard throughout his career for the failings on Nona's case. Like, evidently, he had a lot of backlash, I'm sure. He would be interviewed, throughout the years. He has not been interviewed in a while, but he still stuck with believing that Nona's killer was Kevin. He said he just felt a hunch, a gut feeling. I wonder what he feels now. Looks like Detective Frost, I think he went on to work with the Pope County Sheriff's Office instead of the police department, but it looks like he retired from law enforcement in 2024. I did also find an article where Frost has stated around 2011 to press that he, had tried to get more experienced help on Nona's case, but he was denied by the police department. Food for thought. I won't say what I'm thinking. So most of the parties involved, of course, just like Detective Frost, they retired, they've moved on. Todd Steffi is Dr. Todd Steffi, and he is the lead pastor at Sanctuary Church in Russellville. And I'll just say a huge kudos to you, Dr. Steffi, because, your involvement in Nona's case made all the difference, like all the difference. And of course, just the defense attorneys that introduced Todd Steffi to the case. Yeah, kudos to all of you. So all of you, applause. So most importantly, in this whole thing is Nona and her family. It does appear that Carol is, retired. Looks like she, tends to her flowers and her grandchildren. And, Nona is not forgotten by any of us. She's definitely not forgotten. She's beautiful and talented, and of course taken way too soon. And I like to think she knows exactly the truth. She can see beyond all this, and she knows that sometimes justice isn't had in this life. But I'm sure she's probably also thinking, watching out for other women, from Mr. Gary Dunn. So to sign off, I'll kind of leave you with these beautiful words that were put on Nona's gravestone, I'm sure from Carol. What a beautiful difference one single life made. And yes, it did. So love to all of you, my Unexplained listeners and family. Reach out to me on the social medias and unexplainedarkansas@gmail.com. So this one was a hard one, guys. Let's just be vigilant, and let's just be watching for a certain person to get a certain parole, and just pray that other women do not face what Nona faced and what, Kelly and Amber and Riley. So thank you guys. Have a great day. Bye.
So they did decided to go to Inglewood, Arkansas. Okay, very thoroughly and it believed it. The beat.
Unexplained Arkansas.